Hello, this is Carnegie Politica from the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center in Berlin. I'm Eilish Hart, and today I'm speaking to Zaur Shiriyev, a non-resident scholar at the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center whose research focuses on security, conflict resolution, and foreign policy issues in the South Caucasus. Zaur, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Eilish.
So today we're going to discuss the ongoing peace process between Azerbaijan and Armenia, as well as geopolitical shifts happening in the South Caucasus region. These are pretty big topics, so I'm going to dive right in. So back in August, Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev and Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan attended a peace summit in Washington, and they initialed an agreement aimed at ending the decades of conflict between their two countries. They also signed a deal with the United States to create a major transit corridor, which is set to be named the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity. So why was this an important step forward in this peace process?
Thank you. So I think that it's important to start with a clear point, which is actually the Trump administration didn't create this peace process, and it didn't bring the peace. So because the negotiation has already advancing mostly in bilateral format over the past 2 or 3 years, and the text of agreement was finalized in March. So and I think that what actually happened was that Azerbaijan and Armenia decided to bring the United States in, each for their own reasons and also for few shared interests. So why it's important, the text is initialed, but also not signed yet. So why it's important for context and also text. On textual side, I think it's important because it brings the transparency. So for the first time, people can actually see that what was negotiated and agreed upon. And that matters because over the last few years, we have seen a lot of unfounded the claims and manipulation from the both sides that what about what might or might not included in the agreement. So this transparency is important. And also these rumors, this manipulation actually deepened the lack of trust that already exists between the two sides. So now the text is public. It minimizes the risk of hidden agendas or the surprise elements, and everyone can read it. Of course, some parts are still debated in Azerbaijan and Armenia, and not everyone is happy with every article. But at least for now, the discussion is based on facts, not speculation. So that's why the text is important, and while what they initialed in Washington. But most important, I will say the points is the text. In the text is the establishment of the diplomatic relations. So when it's signed, it's going to upgrade the level of the state level relations to a new level between Azerbaijan and Armenia.
I'm glad you brought up the fact that this really came together as a result of bilateral engagement, because both Aliyev and Pashinyan really attributed this breakthrough in the peace process to the Trump administration, but it wasn't really clear to me how much of a role the United States really played, or if to some extent this was more about Armenia and Azerbaijan trying to build or improve ties with the new U.S. administration.
Yes, I mean, this is, as I said, that the both countries has own reasons. I mean, for Baku and Armenia, for Yerevan to improve their relationship with the United States, and also, and they also, they would like to advance this relationship. At the same time, involvement of the United States is also important because for, I think, for a few reasons. Now we have let's say it lowered the political tensions. You know that in the last 2 years we have the fear, whether imagined or real, that there will be a new escalation between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and now I think everyone understands that this is much more politically costly. So the both sides agrees, and now the United States they guarantee this kind of de facto ceasefire. This is also important for the local population in both sides. So, and they will not fear that there will be new war or escalation. But also, it's also valuable. It gives the both governments space to continue dialogue. And also, another reason is that so it also improved investor confidence for both countries. As we see that the bond markets reflected lower perceived risk, and also the both countries gain some fiscal breathing room. But also, I will say, also it changed the regional balance, regional perception. So we see right now other countries also the region reflects to this the new reality. A few examples we can give. One is that, for example, Armenia established diplomatic relations with Pakistan in end of the August. The same is true for United Kingdom. Actually, lifted ban the arms exports to Azerbaijan and Armenia, and we will see this kind of the reflection by the outsider of the region, which actually shows that there is a lower risk of this. The war, and there is a much more dialogue, and each other outsiders of the region, Western countries would like to advance this peace process.
I wanted to ask about this transit corridor and the fact that they've put Trump's name on it, and he got to have his moment in front of the camera to say that he had settled, this conflict and brokered another peace deal. But I wanted to ask you, is this transit corridor deal a way to ensure sort of sustained U.S. involvement in the peace process going forward? Or are there concerns about sort of the attention span in Washington for actually moving this process forward?
That's a great question. Actually, this is I will say that if I list the risk, let's say not U.S. involvement, but the U.S. role in this process, I think the first risk comes that actually uncertainty about the U.S. commitment. So because so far we understand that we see that the United States see this as actually the political project. So this is the first serious risk, and but also the second related risk is that both Azerbaijan and Armenia advanced, as I mentioned before, that the bilateral track, and also it gave them a room for improving their relationship. And now they're actually investing a lot of political energy in partner that has historically shown a brief attention to the Caucasus, and sometimes discovering it and then forgetting it again. So that's why this is also uncertainty U.S. commitment. Uh, but most important is that we have a political declaration about this transit route. So, but we don't know many questions related to this transit route. So, security, who's going to finance, and what kind of modality we will see. Whether also, that there is an element of reciprocity. So, whether it will also give the space for, let's say, Armenians on also engaging of the regional connectivity. It's not only about this transit routes through Armenian territory between Azerbaijan, mainland Azerbaijan, and its exclave. But if the US commit seriously, but also engage with other actors like European Union and Turkey, which is the key actors, and somehow to create, if they can create a consortium to involve these partners, and then there will be much more stability and predictability. And this is going to make this also U.S. position more stronger in this the process. So now, since August, we don't have answers to these questions. But if this questions is going to be answered, we will see that bigger benefit to the Azerbaijan and Armenia is going to isolate the Nakhchivan exclave of Azerbaijan. Is going to reconnect Armenia to regional connectivity, and also it can make this connectivity a part of the much more broader connectivity projects.
I want to come back to what you were saying about sort of the other regional players in a minute. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I know it's only been 2 months since the peace summit in Washington, but has there been any kind of tangible progress or steps forward on Azerbaijan and Armenia's side in terms of moving towards a place where they could start implementing this peace agreement? Or should we be talking about this more as like a normalization process?
Still, the signature on the peace agreement is lacking, so it's not signed yet.
Mhm.
So that's why we cannot talk about any implementation of the peace agreement. But also, when someone reads the peace agreement, they will see that it's purely, let's say, the legal language, and what's implementable among this from this text is only establishment of the diplomatic relations. But in the meantime, we have this is a good question because we have two extremes of thinking about the peace agreement. On the one side, there are those who believe that signing peace agreement will solve every problem immediately, which is unrealistic. And on the other hand, there are people who think that it's changed nothing, which is equally untrue. But reality is somewhere between. So the agreement itself is not a solution of every problem. Signature is important, but it's only the milestone in a much longer process. So what we need right now, I think, clear roadmap. And I think we don't have this clear roadmap. Clear roadmap until the election of the Armenian election, parliament election next June, and after signing of the peace agreement. So it is right now much more improving the state-to-state relations, and a part of answer to your question that what has changed after August. First of all, rhetoric has changed. So people, both sides are talking about the peace, and also practically the border commission work a little bit advanced, and they're working. Might be not all of the elements are in public. At the same time, as many of our listeners and the watchers know that in a couple of just yesterday, the Azerbaijan announced that it's actually how to say take back its veto any the transit move through Azerbaijan territory, which means that Azerbaijan Armenia can receive. Let's say the cargo transit from Azerbaijan territory through Azerbaijan and going to Georgia and to connecting to Armenia. Why it's important? Because it's a first sign of Armenians reconnecting to this regional integration projects. And also, this is probably the Kazakhstan is going to produce the wheat to Armenia, which Armenia Russia is dominated Armenian market, and Armenia needs the diversification. In a way, actually, Azerbaijan is also helping, or this process is helping Armenia to diversify its the policy, whether it's energy, whether it's about the food security, from Russia.
Yeah, and for Armenia, it would also open up the possibility of reopening the border with Turkey as well, right? Correct?
This was probably hope of the Armenian government that when they signed the Washington Declaration in August, that they can immediately move to opening the border with Turkey. But it's now clear that right now the Baku sees this only after signing of the peace agreement. And Turkey is also in the same, let's say, position. So probably, but in the meantime, I think Turkey and Armenia is talking about how to improve their relationship, how to advance, how to not only focus on opening the border, conflict building measures can be various, but also preparing the state that when the borders are going to open. So, but for now, I think understanding is that the Turk-Armenia land border is not going to open soon. But what is happening at the same time, as we know that let's say there will be much more the air flight between the Yerevan and the Turkish cities, and Turkish airlines also announced that they will also start the flying to Armenia and from Armenia. And we will see probably more the people-to-people contact, the journalistic exchange of the people. So just to prepare, let's say, to advance the Turkish-Armenian dialogue. What I forgot saying, the similar things also happening as Azerbaijan and Armenia. So we will see probably more people-to-people contact. So just a month ago, the Azerbaijani experts visited Armenia. So we will see probably this kind of the exchange more, which is going to normalize, let's say, this as a conflict building measure. So I think time should come that when we shouldn't see this the exchange, or Azerbaijan is going to Yerevan, or Armenia is coming to Baku as a kind of a surprising element, or the big issue. So it should be normalized. It shouldn't became let's say the news. So which means that we need there should be a more this kind of the discussion.
Let's talk about regional players. One regional player that was noticeably absent in all of this is Russia, despite the fact that Moscow had acted as a mediator between Azerbaijan and Armenia for decades. What should we make of Moscow's absence from this process?
I think the Russian absence from this current peace process is one of the clear signs. Is just how the South Caucasus has changed. And back in 2020, I think when the ceasefire was signed after Second Karabakh War between Azerbaijan and Armenia, Moscow held what we can call a hegemonic moment. So it deployed peacekeepers to Karabakh and it positioned itself as a central mediator between Azerbaijan and Armenia. But at the same time, the goal wasn't only stop the fighting, but also goal was actually secure long-term military presence, not just 5 years written into the agreement. Uh, but almost every discussion, so whether about the borders, transport, humanitarian issues, went through to Moscow. But this dominance started to erode by end of the 2021 when the European Union involved in mediation between Azerbaijan and Armenia. But this is where it has changed after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So, and from that point, I think Azerbaijan and Armenia began to look elsewhere for mediation, and serious discussion, talks on peace agreements start to move forward without Russia. So basically, I think Azerbaijan and Armenian real discussion on the peace agreement text started only after Russia preoccupied in the invasion of the Ukraine. But Moscow also tried to push own version of the peace agreement. It was rejected mainly by Baku, but also, you know, also, I think Russia tried to use the very leverage tool, so the ability to play Armenia and Azerbaijan off against each other. This was the main tool of the Russia actually did, not only after 2020 war, but before that, over the course of this conflict, that when something goes wrong with Armenia, they actually looking or warming relations with Azerbaijan or vice versa. And now I think this tool is not working anymore because there are, let's say, much more trust, much more discussion, much more dialogue, and much more the contact between Azerbaijan and Armenia. So I think that's why the both capitals is acting more independently, and Russia's ability to impose itself as a sole power broker has collapsed. I don't think that there is a way that the Russia can, let's say, to introduce itself to this the peace process. And the last element was the Trump rules. As we know that since 2020 ceasefire, as a part of ceasefire, Russia wanted to deploy its, let's say, the border control, also to manage security of the road between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Now we see that the United States involved to this process, and it means that right now both Baku and Yerevan doesn't want to see the Russia to play any role even to this transport issue.
So do you think what we're looking at here is sort of the beginning of a longer term geopolitical shift, or is there some way that Russia could come back and try to re-engage in the region or get itself involved with this transport route, for example? Or like I said, do you think this is sort of like a longer term geopolitical shift?
This is good, the question. I think the Caucasus region, South Caucasus region looks like a competitive marketplace of influence.
Hmm.
So involving the EU, Turkey, Iran, the Gulf states, and United States and Russia. So when we actually talk about this, it's no longer a one player game. So it's not anymore a dominance of the Russia. This is the actual true, but it doesn't mean that Russia is gone completely. It still holds an economic and security influence, particularly in Armenian energy sector, and also through its role in unresolved conflicts in Georgia. And economically, if we, let's say, outside of oil and gas sale, the much of the region still trades through or with Russia. So still Russia has a, let's say, a kind of the economic dominance. But also, there is another layer of this story, and it's a psychological as much a political, I would say. Uh, Even the Russian influence declines, the fear of the Russian remains. And in many contexts, I think the invoking Russia or threat of Russia has become a kind of reflex, a political habit. In Azerbaijan, in Armenia, also in Georgia. Also, I think in media or analysts, we often use people often use Russia as a reference point or convenient explanation when they need to justify certain direction, certain decision, adjust their position, or mobilize public opinion. So Russian footprint basically is smaller, but shadow of Russia is still present, and emotionally, historically, and rhetorically. So that's why we cannot talk about Russia is completely out of the region. It will stay there, but also but it's not going to dominate. So the time has passed, I would say.
We've seen countries in the region sort of react very differently to this long shadow of Russia. I mean, Armenia, for example, more recently, it seems as though they're trying to break off those ties, and there's been movement towards a European Union bid. How would this sort of shift things going forward if Armenia continues in that direction, continues to orient itself towards the European Union?
It depends on the West, how the West is going to react. So if the basic line or prism is that reducing Russian influence in the region, it's understandable. But also how much I think, let's say, West is ready to provide necessary support for this endeavor. I think we don't have this answer. But also, so that's why the logic in Yerevan is also partly is realistic. So they don't see this just shifting from Russia completely and leaning towards the European Union. I think they call it a diversification of their foreign policy. So, uh, in this sense, I think. It's important how the West is going to support. And the limited states will be next year in parliament election in Armenia. And before that, because Russia has many tools in energy sector, in transport, logistics, and the gas and the gas sale to Armenia. So if the blackmail could become a part of the tool of the Russia. So how others are ready to support? I think in this sense, the important how not on the West but also Turkey and Azerbaijan is going to play. What will be their role? I think that because only Azerbaijan and Turkey has enough resources, especially so when if such scenario happens, to support Armenia through their own resources.
We've also seen Azerbaijan's relations with Russia deteriorate significantly in the last year, ever since that deadly Azerbaijan's airlines crash last December. But earlier this month, Vladimir Putin acknowledged that Russian air defenses were responsible for causing the plane crash, and we saw Aliyev respond with gratitude. Are we seeing Moscow and Baku starting to warm up to each other again? And what would that mean for the South Caucasus region if they're heading in the direction of mending ties?
You're right. I think 10 months. The crisis actually is starting December, and right now we see this the early sign of the easing of this tension. Uh, uh, the crisis is over, but I think but I wouldn't call this a warming of relation between the Moscow and the Baku. I will say that what we are seeing is a management, not a renewal. So I think this diplomacy is designed to control the temperature, not to raise it. So this is the basic, the end of the story. Uh, because Azerbaijan also knows that it cannot afford open confrontation with Russia, yet it also no longer fears the Moscow the way it wants this. So and Baku has a much more confidence and kind of the quiet caution. And it's kind of the Russia is negotiating its the position and influence. And this is not a first crisis, I will say. So since 2020, we see a period of the crisis between the Moscow-Baku relations, and but always the Moscow reaction was that, especially after the Ukrainian war, Moscow wanted to keep as much as friendly relations with many countries, especially under the isolation of because of the invasion of Ukraine. But also in mental thinking of Moscow, I think they always see Azerbaijan as a prize. And they had this thinking that Azerbaijan is a prize because, as we know, unlike the Georgia and Armenia, Azerbaijan has no structural dependency to Russia. So it's not a part of the Russian, let's say, security institution or economic institution. It has own, let's say, economic is much more free from Russia. No dependence on oil and gas. I mean, at this energy security. So that's why Moscow will see Baku as a kind of the price, so to improve the relations. But also another part of the story is that Moscow also understands and sees that if it so it's not only if there is a crisis between Moscow and the Baku, it's also a crisis between Moscow and Ankara. So it's a kind of the double-edged sword for the Moscow. So because Turkey is the key ally, I think it proved its capacity back in 2020, not about the military support or political support, also managed to reduce the Russian influence, also Russian reaction during the 2020 war and afterwards. So that's why I think it's not a warming up; it's just managing the relations. But also, as we mentioned, this Armenia question. So and then next year also might be we'll see a kind of the crisis, let's say Baku-Moscow relations. If Moscow start, let's say, intervening let's say, Armenian domestic politics more openly. It's a basic fact. Many people might be not like, but only the Armenian government, current Armenian government, is actually holding up this peace process. So if any shift in Armenia domestic politics means that unfortunately, there will be the collapse of this peace process. So, because we don't have a signed peace agreement, we don't have let's say, such kind of it's improving, but it's not, let's say, finalized yet. So it's a dynamic process between Azerbaijan and Armenia. So where it needs stability and a partner that will support this process.
Well, it looks like we're going to have to keep watching to see when they finally, put pen to paper and get the peace process signed. I could keep asking you many more questions, but I think we're going to have to leave it there for now. That was Zaur Shiriyev, a non-resident scholar at the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center. Zaur, thank you so much for sharing your insight.
Thank you for inviting us. Thank you for talking to me.
And thank you to our audience for watching. If you enjoyed this conversation, let us know by liking this video or leaving us a comment. And don't forget to subscribe for more expert interviews like this one. I'm Eilish Hart, and we'll see you next time on Carnegie Politica.